3 with a new lesson, Chapter 4, Mesopotamia. This is the map of Mesopotamia. The area includes many countries and cities and rivers. To start, when we discussed last session that there were certain characteristics of a civilization, we mentioned that the very first four civilizations to emerge were Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, and China. These civilizations are called the river valley civilizations because they all emerged around the area of rivers or waters. The need for water greatly influenced where people settled. Mesopotamia means the land between the two rivers in Greek. The civilization of Mesopotamia began between the two rivers of Tigris and the Euphrates. Mesopotamia is located inside what is known as the Fertile Crescent, which includes part of the modern-day countries Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Palestine, and Jordan. A question to think about is why do you think this area was known as the Fertile Crescent? Well, if you see the location, you have rivers, waterways, and land around it. Water is necessary for a fertile soil. So mainly the activities in this area would be fishing and farming. Water is found from all around, so this is why it's called the Fertile Crescent. Historians believe that the first people to settle in Mesopotamia around the 7000 BC were the hunters and gatherers. By 14,000 BC, some of these settlers moved to the plains of the Tigris and the Euphrates, and they built the farming villages along the two rivers, which then led to the agricultural revolution. Farmers depended on water from the two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, to grow the crops. There was a problem. In the summer, there was very little rain, so the rivers became very low, and the farmers didn't have enough water to crop their plants. In spring, the rain and the melting snow from the winter and from the northern mountains caused these two rivers to overflow. Because of this overflowing, many times they would have violent floodings. These floods would sweep away the crops and the homes. So in summer, they would have low, dry lands. In spring, they would have overflooding that would also destroy the crops. These floods were, on another hand, helpful or the floods had some advantages. The flood water that was left behind left silt or small particles of good soil, which were good for farming. The Mesopotamian people had to learn how to find the solution for this problem, so they built dams and they dig canals. The dams were used to control the overflow of the water, and the canals were used to make a waterway in case flooding happens. They also used the canals to lead the water directly to the areas of the farms away from the houses so that nothing would be destroyed or no damage would happen. This method of watering crops is called irrigation. When they started building the irrigation, as you can see the irrigation canals or systems, the farms were no longer destroyed, the crops were no longer destroyed, and they had a surplus or excess of food. So, what do you think these are the effects, or what do you think the effects of having surpluses had on one of these ancient communities? Please take note that these questions, I answered the first one. The questions in the slides, you need to answer them so we can discuss them in the extra care session. Surplus of food meant that not all men were needed to work at the farm. As we said in the previous lesson, the surplus led the people to have their own free time, which led to the action of specialization, or they found other tasks to do. These tasks included pottery, crafts. The artisans made more goods other than the crops. This is the time when the people's lives changed. This is also the time when they started to trade, not only crops and not only in barter system, but they started to trade with nearby areas. After this trading, several cities started to develop in Sumer, which is the southern region of Mesopotamia. This was the first region to develop in the Mesopotamian civilization. So to start with Sumer, the people of Sumer were known as the Sumerians. The Sumerians built the first cities in Southeast Asia. This, these first cities became the center of civilization, and they controlled the lower part of the Tigris and the Euphrates River Valley. As we said, there was a certain system of living and ruling in the Sumerian city states, or in Sumer, or in the Mesopotamian civilization. They lived in mudflats, or patches, or groups of lands in the middle of the desert. Okay, the mudflats and the patches of these deserts, they surrounded the Sumer cities. So they lived in the Mesopotamian area. They were surrounded by desert, but they had groups of living areas that were all surrounded by the deserts. Because of this natural isolation from one another, the cities became independent. So just like Greece earlier, from that you learned from earlier years, they were naturally isolated. They were isolated. They had a vast area of desert around them, so no one could really come to them. These cities, the city states, became independent and they formed their own government. Because they had political and economic differences, they called themselves city states. Yes, they were all in one country, but they all had their different rules and systems to follow. Archaeologists believe that each city state was protected by a high wall built from mud from the rivers that overflowed it. These city states often went to war with one another. Why? Because of the resources, the political borders, but sometimes they had peace. When they had peace, they traded with one another and they formed alliances. Sumerian gods, Sumerian people worshipped many gods. This is the religion that is known as polytheism. So the Sumerians were polytheistic. They believed different gods had different actions or guided different various aspects of their lives. They honored specific gods that they thought would help with this activity. So they believed in many gods. They believed that each god had a certain action or was concerned with a particular thing. And anytime they needed something specific from this god, they would honor them with a certain ceremony or activity. To honor their gods, the Sumerians built large temples. These temples were called ziggurats. This is a picture of a ziggurat. It looked like either a square shaped or sometimes a square based pyramid. And it usually was hierarchical, which means that it goes from a very large base to a narrow top. This is where we're stopping for the first week. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to write them down so we can discuss them in the extra care session. Thank you.